You think you can just ignore us? This land will belong to Pinewood Estates whether you like it or not." That's what Craig Hollister said to me, standing at my fence line in a $3,000 suit, pointing at dirt my grandfather paid cash for in 1952. My ranch, my cattle, my 45 acres that existed 13 years before his precious subdivision was even a blueprint. But according to the HOA president, I was the obstacle. According to him, I was the stubborn old farmer refusing to cooperate with community standards that had zero legal jurisdiction over my property. He convinced his board I was the enemy. He hired muscle to prove it. Comment below where you're watching from. I need to know there are still people who believe in property rights. It started with a black SUV parked across the county road, binoculars glinting in the morning sun, watching my land like they already owned it. I've owned this land for 30 years, but the Dawson name has been on the deed for more than 70. My grandfather bought these 45 acres in 1952 with cash he saved from 2 decades of factory work. When he handed the property to my father, he made him swear never to sell. Not 1 acre, not 1 inch. I kept that oath through 20 years of Army service. 3 deployments, and shrapnel wounds I don't discuss at dinner parties. I did all of that believing I was protecting something worth protecting. The right to own what's yours. The right to be left alone on your own land. The right to tell anyone who disagrees to get off your property. 3 weeks before that SUV showed up, I installed 8 security cameras around the perimeter of my ranch. The reason was simple. Craig Hollister, president of the Pinewood Estates HOA, had visited my gate twice in 6 months, trying to buy 10 acres along my eastern boundary. He wanted to expand his subdivision into Phase 2, and my land was blocking his blueprint. Both times I refused. The second time, he stood at my fence in his $3,000 suit and said I'd regret that decision. Men who make threats like that don't stop at words, so I mounted cameras on the barn, the main gate, the east fence line, and both corners of the house. The footage is fed directly to a secure server. Maggie, my wife of 31 years, thought I was overreacting. She stopped thinking that when the letters started arriving. The first one came in April from the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association. It informed me that my fence color violated community aesthetic standards and that my cattle were creating odor issues for nearby residents. They gave me 30 days to comply or face fines. I called my attorney, Rachel Webb. She confirmed what I already knew. My property had never been part of their subdivision. Their covenants had no legal force on my land. But I'd been around long enough to know that people who send letters like that don't give up after one try. The second letter arrived in June, certified mail, requiring my signature. This one accused me of overgrown vegetation threatening community safety, agricultural runoff contaminating shared water resources, and failure to maintain property in accordance with neighborhood standards. The letter demanded $5,000 in fines and threatened legal action if I didn't comply within 2 weeks. I showed it to Rachel. She drafted a response that I sent by certified mail the next day. It cited state property law, referenced my deed, and made one thing absolutely clear. Any person who entered my property without permission would be prosecuted for criminal trespass under State Code Section 30-05. I kept a copy. I had a feeling I'd need it. The morning that the SUV appeared, I was standing on my porch with my second cup of coffee, watching the sun climb over the ridge the way I'd watched it climb for 3 decades. There's a rhythm to ranch life that most people never understand. You wake before the light because the animals don't care what time your alarm says. You check the fences because a hole you miss today becomes a missing calf tomorrow. You watch the land because it's yours, and watching it is the only way to keep it. That's what I was doing when the black vehicle pulled onto the shoulder of the county road, right across from my main gate. It sat there with the engine running, windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever was inside. Then, I saw the binoculars. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I walked back inside, checked my phone to make sure the cameras were recording, then grabbed my notebook from the kitchen drawer. By the time I reached the gate, whoever was holding those binoculars had switched to a camera with a long lens. They were photographing my house, my barn, my cattle. I stood at the gate and stared at the vehicle for a full 2 minutes without moving. Then the driver's window came down about 3 inches. No face, just a hand holding a phone, taking one more picture. The window went back up. The SUV pulled away. I wrote down the plate number and the time. 6:14 in the morning. Then I called Sheriff Tom Beaumont. Tom and I served together in Afghanistan, shared a foxhole outside Kandahar, and he'd pulled me out when things went bad. More importantly, he'd dealt with Craig Hollister before. 2 other landowners on the edge of Pinewood Estates had filed harassment complaints in the past 3 years. Neither case went anywhere because both families sold and moved before charges could stick. Tom knew the pattern. "They're scouting," I said. "Next time, they won't just watch." He didn't argue. He didn't ask for proof. "Keep those cameras rolling," he said, "and call me the second they set foot on your land." 3 days after I sent the certified letter to Craig Hollister, he showed up at my gate with backup. I was repairing a section of fence near the barn when Maggie called from the porch. "Hank, you've got visitors." The way she said it told me everything. Not neighbors, not friends. I set down my tools and walked toward the main entrance without hurrying. A man who rushes looks scared. I had nothing to be scared of. 2 vehicles sat on my side of the county road, pulled right up to my gate. Craig Hollister leaned against a white BMW with his arms crossed, sunglasses catching the afternoon light. The second vehicle was a black pickup truck with 3 men standing beside it. They wore matching navy polo shirts with a logo on the chest. Pinewood Estates Compliance Team. I'd heard rumors about this group at the feed store last month. Craig had created it 6 months ago, supposedly to enforce community standards, but the old-timers said it was really his personal pressure squad for dealing with difficult landowners. The biggest of the 3 stepped forward when I approached. Crew cut, thick neck, the posture of someone who'd worn a uniform before. He positioned himself between me and Craig like a shield. I stopped 6 feet from my own gate and waited. Let them talk first. Let them make the first mistake. Craig pushed off his car and walked toward me with a salesman's smile. "Mr. Dawson, I received your letter. I was disappointed. I thought we could resolve this like reasonable neighbors." I kept my voice flat. "We're not neighbors. My land isn't part of your association." He tilted his head like I'd said something amusing. Pinewood Estates is a planned community. Property values depend on consistency. Your ranch creates certain problems. The smell, the appearance, the message it sends to potential buyers. He paused, letting that sink in. "I've already spoken with the county planning office about your agricultural permit. They're very interested in whether your cattle operation meets current environmental runoff standards. Inspections can be arranged. Permits can be reviewed. These things have a way of becoming complicated for people who don't cooperate." The big man in the navy polo stepped closer. "Mr. Dawson, I'm Derek Vance. We're not here to threaten you. We're here to help you understand your options. The association has significant resources. Mr. Hollister is offering you a fair price for the eastern 10 acres. I'd encourage you to consider it carefully." I looked at Derek without blinking. "I spent 20 years in the Army. You think 3 guys in matching shirts are going to change my mind about my own land?" Derek's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Craig stepped forward, his smile gone. "I'm trying to be civil. Dawson, but I have relationships in this county. The Planning Commission, the Zoning Board, the Environmental Health Department, people who can make life very complicated for a small rancher who refuses to cooperate." I pointed at the camera mounted on the gatepost, its red light blinking steadily. "Everything you just said is being recorded. Every threat, every implication. If you or anyone working for you sets one foot on my property, I will have you arrested for criminal trespass, and I'll make sure every media outlet in this state knows that the president of Pinewood Estates thinks he's above the law." Craig stared at the camera like he was seeing it for the first time. Derek's eyes swept the fence line. Counting the other cameras, he hadn't noticed. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Craig straightened his shirt and turned toward his car. "This isn't over, Dawson. You'll wish you'd taken my offer." He drove away without looking back. Derek held my gaze for another few seconds, then gestured to his men. They climbed into the black pickup and followed, leaving nothing but dust in the air. That night, I sat on the porch with Maggie and watched the stars come out. She hadn't said much since I told her about the confrontation. "They'll come back," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Derek said this isn't over. Men like him don't make empty statements. She reached over and took my hand. "What do we do?" I thought about Craig's connections, his compliance team, and his willingness to threaten me on my own doorstep. "We prepare," I said. "We document everything, and when they cross the line, we make sure they regret it." I called Tom Beaumont before bed and told him about Craig's threats, about Derek Vance, about the environmental inspection Craig had implied he could arrange. Tom listened without interrupting. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "I've been tracking complaints about Pinewood Estates for 3 years now," he said. 2 families on the boundary filed harassment reports before you. The Millers lasted 8 months before they sold at a loss and moved to Oklahoma. The Hendersons made it 6 months before someone slashed their tires and broke their mailbox 3 nights in a row. No proof it was Craig's people, but both families said the same thing. The pressure never stopped until they were gone. I asked him why nothing had been done. "Because they left before we could build a case," Tom said. "They got scared, took whatever offer Craig gave them, and disappeared. That's his pattern. Push until someone breaks." I told him I wasn't planning to break. "Good," he said, "because when they cross onto your land, I want to be there to greet them. Keep those cameras rolling. And Hank, don't let them provoke you into doing something stupid. We're going to do this by the book." 2 weeks passed without incident. No letters, no SUVs are parked on the county road, no phone calls from blocked numbers. I started to wonder if my certified warning had actually worked, if Craig Hollister had decided that my 45 acres weren't worth the legal trouble. Maggie said I was being naive. She was right. It happened on a Saturday morning in late June. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Eggs and toast, coffee steaming between us, the kind of quiet breakfast we'd shared for 3 decades. The sun was just clearing the tree line when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I picked it up and felt my stomach drop. The East Gate camera showed 3 men in navy polo shirts cutting through my padlock with a bolt cutter. Derek Vance held the tool. Behind him were 2 others I'd later learn were Ray Munson and Eddie Grimes. They moved like men who'd been promised protection. I found out later that Craig had told them the county sheriff was a personal friend who wouldn't interfere with HOA business. Craig was wrong about that. I stood up slowly and looked at Maggie. "Call Tom. Tell him they're on my property right now. East Gate." She was already reaching for her phone as I walked toward the door. I grabbed my cell and started the voice recorder, slipping it into my shirt pocket with the microphone facing out. I did not take any weapons. That was deliberate. If I confronted them armed, this could become a self-defense case with lawyers arguing about who threatened whom. I wanted them arrested for trespassing. I wanted charges that would stick. So I walked out with nothing but my phone and the knowledge that 8 cameras were recording every move they made. By the time I reached the east fence, they had already come 50 yards onto my land. Derek was photographing my cattle with a long-lens camera. Ray was measuring the fence line with a surveyor's wheel, writing numbers on a clipboard. Eddie stood watch, scanning the property, when they saw me coming. Derek lowered his camera and clasped his hands behind his back like a soldier at parade rest. He didn't speak first. He waited for me to close the distance, forcing me to come to him on my own land. I stopped 20 feet away and spoke loud enough for my phone to capture every word. You cut through a locked gate to enter private property. Under State Code Section 30-05. That's criminal trespass. Leave now. Derek tilted his head slightly and gestured toward Ray's clipboard. We're documenting environmental conditions along the property boundary. Mr. Hollister has concerns about agricultural runoff affecting Pinewood Estates. This assessment will support a formal complaint to the County Environmental Health Department. I understood immediately. They weren't here to survey. They were here to manufacture evidence. Whatever Ray was writing on that clipboard would become the basis for a government inspection, permit review, or zoning challenge. Craig was building a paper trail to force me off my land through bureaucratic warfare. Ray looked up from his clipboard with a grin. Relax, farmer. We'll be done in 20 minutes, unless you want to make this difficult. I kept my eyes on Derek. Every second you remain here adds to the charges. Destruction of property. Willful trespass after notice. If any of you are armed, it becomes a felony. Ray's grin disappeared. Eddie's hand twitched toward his belt, then stopped. Derek remained motionless. But I watched his weight shift backward almost imperceptibly. The first crack in his composure. In the distance. A siren wailed, faint at first, then growing louder. Derek's head turned toward the county road. When he looked back at me, his expression had hardened. You'll regret making enemies of people with resources. Dawson. The county works slowly, but it works thoroughly. He turned and walked toward the cut fence without waiting for a response. Ray and Eddie followed, moving faster than they'd arrived. I watched them climb through the gap, pile into a black pickup, and speed away toward town. Dust hung in the air. My padlock lay on the ground in 2 pieces. Tom Beaumont arrived 5 minutes later. He stepped out of his cruiser and surveyed the damage, then watched the footage on my phone without comment. 3 men are entering. Derek is directing the others. My verbal order to leave. Their refusal. Their eventual retreat. When the video ended. Tom exhaled slowly. This is solid documentation. But here's the problem. I didn't witness the trespass personally. They're gone, and by the time I file charges, they'll claim they had verbal permission from you, or that they were standing on county right-of-way. Their lawyer will argue the footage doesn't prove criminal intent, without catching them in the act with a sworn officer present. The case falls apart before it reaches a courtroom. I'd expected something like this, but hearing it still burned. So they just get away with it. Tom shook his head. They get away with this one. But men like Derek don't stop. Craig Hollister doesn't stop. They'll push again, harder, because they think today proved they're untouchable. I looked at the tire tracks in the dirt, the gap in my fence, and the direction they'd driven. Then next time, I want you here before they arrive, not after. Tom studied my face for a long moment. You're talking about a coordinated operation. Deputies are positioned on your property, waiting, legal authority to arrest the moment they cross the boundary. I nodded. Everything by the book. Probable cause based on today's incident, plus the documented pattern of harassment. No entrapment, no provocation, just law enforcement doing its job when criminals return to the scene. Tom was quiet. I could see him working through the logistics, the paperwork, the chain of command he'd need to convince. Finally, he extended his hand. I'll need to brief my deputies and get a sign-off from the district attorney's office, if they approve the operation. We will do this clean. You stay in the house. You don't confront anyone. You let us handle the arrest." I shook his hand. "Agreed." He drove away, and I stood at my broken gate watching the empty road. They would come back. Men like Craig Hollister always did. And when they returned, they'd find more than an old rancher waiting for them. 2 days after the intrusion, the letter arrived, certified mail again, requiring my signature, like they wanted to make sure I knew exactly who was coming for me. I stood at my mailbox and read it twice before walking back to the house. Craig Hollister wasn't backing down. He was doubling down. The letter was printed on Pinewood Estates' HOA letterhead, but the language came straight from a lawyer's office. It accused me of harassment, interference with community operations, and creating a hostile environment for Pinewood residents. It demanded $15,000 in damages for emotional distress caused to HOA board members, plus another $10,000 for legal fees already incurred. The final paragraph stated that if I didn't respond within 14 days, the association would file suit in county court seeking injunctive relief, $25,000 and a court order. That was Craig's price for my silence. I called Rachel Webb and read her the letter over the phone. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before responding. "Hank, this is pure intimidation. They're claiming $25,000 in damages when there's no quantifiable harm. Emotional distress requires medical documentation, therapy records, and something concrete. They don't have any of that because nothing happened to them. The number is intentionally inflated to scare you into settling before you realize they have no case." I asked her what she recommended. "We respond with everything we've collected. The video of Derek cutting your lock, the audio of Craig threatening to use county connections against you, the incident report from Sheriff Beaumont. We make it clear that if they proceed, we countersue for trespass, harassment, and malicious prosecution. Then we see if Craig is stupid enough to actually file." Maggie came back from town that afternoon with news that made the lawsuit look like a minor annoyance. She'd stopped at the grocery store on Main Street, the same one her family had shopped at for 40 years. 3 women she'd known from church were standing in the produce section, talking loud enough for the whole store to hear. They stopped when they saw Maggie, but not before she caught enough. Craig Hollister had sent an email blast to every resident in Pinewood Estates the night before, according to Maggie's friend, Ellen, who'd forwarded her a copy. The email claimed I had threatened HOA employees with a shotgun, that I was mentally unstable, and that my cattle operation posed health risks to the community. It urged residents to contact the county planning office and demand an investigation. None of it was true. But by the time the email reached 200 inboxes, the damage was done. Maggie set the grocery bags on the counter without looking at me. "Susan Whitmore asked if I was safe living out here with you. She wanted to know if you'd ever been violent before." Susan Whitmore had taught Sunday school with Maggie for 15 years. They'd organized charity drives together, baked cookies for the same fundraisers, and watched each other's children grow up. Now she was asking my wife if I was a threat. "What did you tell her?" I asked. Maggie turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen since my last deployment. Fear mixed with anger, held together by determination. I told her that if she believed a word Craig Hollister said, she wasn't the friend I thought she was. Then I left without buying anything. That night, Rachel came to the house with a folder full of new material. She'd compiled the HOA email blast, screenshots of comments from residents on the neighborhood message board, and a timeline showing Craig's escalating campaign against us. "This strengthens our harassment case significantly," she said. "He's not just trespassing. He's conducting a coordinated defamation campaign. When we file for everything." Tom called later that evening with an update on law enforcement coordination. The district attorney had reviewed the pattern of conduct, including the documented threats, the first intrusion, and Craig's public statements, and approved a monitoring operation. "This isn't entrapment," Tom emphasized. "We're not inducing anyone to commit a crime. We're positioning deputies to respond immediately when they repeat behavior they've already demonstrated. The DA's office confirmed its standard procedure for anticipated repeat offenses with established probable cause. 3 deputies would be in position before dawn if we received any indication of another planned entry. The moment anyone crossed my fence line, they'd be arrested on sight. After Tom hung up, I sat on the porch with Maggie, watching the sun sink behind the western hills. She'd been quieter than usual since coming back from town. The confrontation with Susan had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. 30 years of community, 30 years of friendships, and one email from Craig Hollister had turned neighbors into strangers. I could see the weight of it pressing on her shoulders. Finally, she broke the silence. We could sell. Take whatever Craig offers and start over somewhere else. Arizona, maybe, or New Mexico, somewhere. Nobody knows our names. But I looked at her, then out at the land my family had protected for 3 generations, the pastures where my father taught me to ride, the barn my grandfather built with his own hands. I thought about the Millers and the Hendersons, the families Tom had mentioned who'd faced this same pressure, and walked away. I understood now why they'd left. The harassment wasn't just legal, it was personal. It reached into your church, your grocery store, your friendships. It made you a stranger in your own community. But walking away meant Craig won. It meant every landowner on the edge of his development would face the same choice. Sell or suffer. I wasn't willing to make that trade. This is our home, I said. I won't let him take it by making us miserable enough to leave. Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Then she took my hand and squeezed it. Then we fight. Together. Rachel Webb called me on a Wednesday morning with the kind of voice that meant she'd found something worth finding. Hank, I need you and Maggie to come to my office. There are things you need to see in person. I didn't ask questions. When your lawyer tells you to drive 40 minutes to look at documents. You drive 40 minutes and look at documents. Her office was in a converted Victorian house on the edge of town, the kind of place that looked like a bed and breakfast but smelled like printer ink and coffee. She led us to a conference room with papers spread across the table in organized stacks. 3 separate piles, each one labeled with a sticky note. Rachel closed the door behind us and gestured for us to sit. I've been doing some digging, she said. What I found turns this from a property dispute into something much bigger. She started with the first pile. Corporate registration documents showing Craig Hollister as sole owner of Hollister Development, LLC, the company that built Pinewood Estates. Next to it, she placed a planning commission map filed 6 months ago. Phase 2, expansion. The proposed footprint covered my eastern pasture. The 10 acres Craig had tried to buy twice. This isn't just harassment, Rachel said. It's a coordinated land grab with Craig positioned to profit on both ends. As HOA president, he pressures owners to sell. As a developer, he buys at distressed prices and builds. He's required by state law to disclose this conflict to HOA members. According to my source, he never did. The second pile contained Pinewood Estates, CC&Rs, with a highlighted section near the end. An amendment added 18 months ago gave the HOA board authority to extend jurisdiction over adjacent properties when necessary to protect community standards. Rachel tapped the page. This is Craig's legal fig leaf. He added this language at a board meeting with 4 people present, then buried it in the annual disclosure packet. But here's the thing, Hank, no reasonable court would enforce this. You can't unilaterally claim jurisdiction over land you don't own. It's legally meaningless. Craig knows that. He's counting on intimidation and confusion, not actual authority. The third pile made my jaw tighten. Financial records from the Pinewood Estates HOA Operating Fund, a series of payments totaling $37,000 over 8 months, all made to a company called Vanguard Security Solutions. That's Derek's company, Rachel said. Craig is using homeowner dues to fund a private contractor who reports directly to him. Every resident in Pinewood Estates has been paying for this without knowing it. That's misappropriation of community funds, a criminal offense under state nonprofit statutes. I looked at the documents spread across the table. Conflict of interest, fraudulent amendments, financial misconduct. How did you find all this? Rachel smiled. I have a source inside the HOA, a board member who's been documenting Craig's behavior for 3 years. She picked up her phone and dialed. A woman's voice answered on the second ring. Michelle, I have Mr. and Mrs. Dawson here. Would you mind sharing what you told me? Michelle Turner had been on the Pinewood Estates board for 4 years. She'd voted against Craig on every major decision and kept records of everything. I have emails between Craig and Derek discussing the compliance team visits, Michelle said. I have board meeting minutes that Craig tried to suppress, showing the vote on the jurisdiction amendment was held without proper quorum. And I have notes from a dinner party last year where Craig told 3 of us that the Hendersons just needed extra encouragement to make the right decision. He laughed when he said it. I wrote down the date and the names of everyone present. Michelle explained that Craig had used the same approach on the Millers and the Hendersons, 2 families who'd owned property on the development boundary before me. The Millers sold after 6 months. The Hendersons lasted longer, until someone vandalized their property 3 nights in a row. There's no paper trail connecting Derek to what happened, Michelle said, but Craig's own words at that dinner make his intentions clear. I documented everything because I knew someday someone would need it. Maggie's hand found mine under the table. I asked Michelle the only question that mattered. Are you willing to testify to this in court? The line was quiet for a moment. If you can get Derek arrested for what he did on your property, I'll bring everything I have. The emails, the minutes, my written notes with dates and witnesses. But I need to see consequences first. I'm not putting myself at risk for a case that gets dismissed. After we hung up, Rachel gathered the documents into a single folder and handed it to me. Hank, what we have here isn't just evidence of trespassing. It's a documented pattern of criminal conduct spanning 3 years, involving fraud, misappropriation, harassment, and conspiracy. When Craig makes his next move, we won't be playing defense. We'll be dismantling his entire operation. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, 6 words that made my pulse quicken. Saturday, 7 a.m. They're coming back. More than 3 this time. I stared at the message for a long moment, then forwarded it to Tom Beaumont. His response came within minutes. Understood. Deputies in position by 6. Don't reply. I called him anyway. Any idea who sent this? Tom was quiet for a moment. Could be Michelle, protecting herself by staying anonymous. It could be someone else on Craig's crew who's getting nervous about legal exposure. Or it could be Craig himself, testing whether you'll react and tip your hand. He paused. Either way, treat it as credible. If they show up Saturday, we'll be ready. If they don't, we've lost nothing but sleep. I deleted the text and set my phone on the kitchen counter. Saturday was 3 days away. 3 days to wait. 3 days to prepare. And then we'd see whether Craig Hollister's connections could protect him from the consequences he'd spent years avoiding. I woke at 4:30 on Saturday morning without needing an alarm, the kind of wakefulness that comes before combat, when your body knows something is coming, even if your mind hasn't caught up yet. Maggie was already awake beside me, staring at the ceiling. Neither of us had slept more than a few hours. We lay there in the darkness for a while, listening to the silence, then got up and started the coffee without speaking. Tom Beaumont arrived at 5:15 with 3 deputies in 2 unmarked vehicles. They parked behind my barn, out of sight from the county road, and gathered in my kitchen for a final briefing. Deputy Martinez would position herself in the hayloft with a clear view of the east gate. Deputy Chen would wait in the equipment shed near the fence line. Deputy Rawlings would stay with Tom in the main barn, ready to move on his signal. I would be the visible element. Maggie would remain in the house, monitoring cameras and recording to a backup drive. "We move when they're at least 20 feet past the fence line," Tom said. "That eliminates any claim they were standing on a county easement or got confused about the boundary. They need to be undeniably on private property, undeniably ignoring Hank's order to leave. Clear threshold. Clean arrest." By 6 o'clock, everyone was in position. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet, but the sky was lightening from black to gray to pale orange along the eastern horizon. I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hands, watching the county road through the gap in the trees. Waiting. 6:15, 6:30. 6:45. I started to wonder if the anonymous tip had been wrong. Then, at 7:02, 2 black SUVs appeared on the county road and slowed as they approached my property. They pulled onto the shoulder across from the east gate. Doors opened. 6 men stepped out. I recognized Derek Vance immediately. His crew cut and thick shoulders unmistakable even at this distance. Ray Munson and Eddie Grimes flanked him. 3 others I didn't recognize formed a second row behind them. This wasn't the casual approach of their first visit. They moved in formation, organized, and rehearsed. One man carried a hydraulic spreader instead of a simple bolt cutter, the kind of tool designed for speed and silence. Another held a tablet computer, likely loaded with the fake environmental data they planned to document. They'd come prepared to work fast and leave before anyone could respond. But it was the 6th man who made my heart beat faster. Craig Hollister stepped out of the passenger side of the lead vehicle. I'd wondered if he would show. According to Michelle, Craig had grown paranoid after my certified letter, worried that Derek might cut a deal if things went wrong. He'd decided to supervise personally, to make sure his team finished the job and kept their mouths shut afterward. I pulled out my phone and texted Tom a single word. "Here." Then I walked toward the east gate, keeping my pace steady, my hands visible at my sides. The morning air was cool and still, birds waking in the trees, the distant lowing of my cattle, the crunch of gravel under my boots. By the time I reached the fence, they'd already breached the gate. The hydraulic spreader had popped the lock in seconds, faster and quieter than the bolt cutter Derek had used before. The gate swung open, and the 6 men walked onto my property in 2 columns. Craig stayed near the vehicles at first, arms crossed, watching from the road. Derek led the others forward, spreading them across my pasture with hand signals like a squad leader deploying troops. The man with the tablet started photographing my cattle. Ray began marking locations with orange flags. Professional, efficient, escalated. I stopped when Derek was 40 feet onto my land and raised my voice. "This property is under documented surveillance. Every one of you has been identified. I am formally notifying you that your presence here is unauthorized and unlawful. You have 30 seconds to withdraw before I request law enforcement intervention." Different words than last time, but the same legal effect. Clear notice, clear refusal, clear recording. Derek barely glanced at me. "We have authorization from the Homeowners Association. Mr. Dawson, take it up with the board." He turned his back and gestured for his team to continue. I raised my voice toward the road. "Mr. Hollister, you're witnessing your contractors operate on land you have no authority over. Every second you allow this to continue makes you personally liable." Craig uncrossed his arms and walked through the gate, stopping just inside the fence line, then continuing forward until he stood beside Derek, well past the threshold Tom had specified. He smiled, and there was something predatory in it. "Dawson, I've tried being patient with you. I've offered fair prices. I've given you opportunities." He gestured at the land around us. "But some people only understand force when this survey is complete. I'll have documentation proving your operation endangers my community. County inspections will follow. Your permits will be challenged. And you'll sell. Just like the Millers. Just like the Hendersons. He looked at Derek. Finish the assessment. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Craig had walked onto my property, given a direct order to continue the trespass, and referenced his previous victims by name. All of it recorded, all of it witnessed. I took a breath. Final notice. Leave now, or face immediate arrest. Craig laughed. Your friend. The sheriff. I've already talked to people who matter. Beaumont won't touch me. Tom's voice cut through the morning air. Craig Hollister, stop where you are. Craig's laugh died in his throat. Tom emerged from behind the barn with Deputy Rawlings beside him. Deputy Martinez appeared at the fence line to the north. Deputy Chen stepped out from the equipment shed to the south. 4 officers, positioned in a loose circle, every exit blocked. Tom walked forward with his badge, catching the early sunlight. I'm Sheriff Tom Beaumont. I just witnessed you order your contractors to continue occupying private property after receiving a lawful notice to leave. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit criminal trespass, criminal mischief, and whatever else the district attorney adds after reviewing the evidence. The color drained from Craig's face in a single moment, like watching a mask slip away to reveal something hollow underneath. He opened his mouth, closed it, then managed 3 words. This is entrapment. Tom shook his head. Entrapment requires law enforcement to induce a crime you wouldn't otherwise commit. You drove here yourself. You walked past the boundary yourself. You gave orders yourself. I just watched. He looked at Derek. Vance, Munson, Grimes, and the rest of you. Hands visible. You're all under arrest for criminal trespass in the 1st degree. Derek's jaw tightened, but he didn't resist. He looked at Craig like a soldier waiting for orders that weren't coming. The other men exchanged glances, uncertain, afraid. Deputy Chen moved forward with handcuffs. One by one, they were restrained and led toward the patrol vehicles that Deputy Martinez had pulled around from behind the barn. When the cuffs clicked around Craig's wrists, he finally found his voice. Do you have any idea who I am? Your career is finished. Beaumont. Tom leaned close enough that only Craig and I could hear. You've been threatening people with your connections for years. The Millers, the Hendersons, now Mr. Dawson. But connections disappear fast when the person they're connected to becomes a liability. He straightened up. Read him his rights. Martinez. I watched them load Craig into the back of a patrol car. Through the window. His face had gone blank, the expression of a man whose entire worldview had just collapsed. Derek went into a separate vehicle without a word. The others followed, heads down, already calculating the cost. Maggie appeared beside me as the last vehicle pulled away. She slipped her hand into mine, and we stood together watching the dust settle on the county road. Is it over? She asked. I thought about the trial ahead, Michelle Turner's testimony, and the documents Rachel had compiled. The confrontation is over, I said. Now we let the system finish what we started. 2 months after the arrests, I sat in the county courthouse wearing the same suit I'd worn to my father's funeral. Maggie sat beside me, her hand resting on my knee. Rachel Webb occupied the chair to my left, a thick folder of documents on the table in front of her, across the aisle. Craig Hollister sat with his defense attorney, a slick-looking man from the city who'd probably cost more than my truck. The courtroom was fuller than I'd expected. Local reporters occupied the front row. Behind them sat a dozen residents from Pinewood Estates, some curious, some hostile. A few who nodded at me when our eyes met. Word had spread. People wanted to see how this ended. District Attorney Patricia Okonkwo handled the prosecution personally. She opened with the footage from that Saturday morning, projected onto a screen so the jury could watch the moment Craig walked past my fence line and ordered Derek to continue. when the recording reached Craig's voice telling me I'd sell, just like everyone else. Okonkwo paused the playback and let the silence fill the room. She didn't need to explain what those words meant. The jury understood. Sheriff Tom Beaumont testified for 40 minutes. He focused on what he'd witnessed personally: the arrests, the threshold protocol, the clear violation of my property rights. When the defense attorney suggested Tom had a personal bias because of our military friendship. Tom looked at him without blinking. I witnessed 6 men trespassing on private property after receiving lawful notice to leave. I witnessed Mr. Hollister give a direct order to continue. Those are facts. The defense attorney moved on. Michelle Turner took the stand on the second day, and she brought everything. Her documentation had been authenticated by a digital forensics expert who confirmed the email metadata matched Craig's official HOA account. The board meeting minutes she'd preserved showed the jurisdiction amendment pass, with only 3 members present, 2 votes short of quorum. Her handwritten notes from Craig's dinner party included the date, the address, and the names of 4 witnesses who'd heard him brag about pressuring the Millers and Hendersons off their land. He called it encouragement, Michelle said, her voice steady now. He said some people needed extra motivation to make smart decisions. Everyone at that table knew what he meant. One of the jurors wrote something down. Another shook her head slowly. The defense mounted an argument based on good faith misunderstanding. Craig's attorney claimed his client genuinely believed the HOA had authority over adjacent properties. He suggested the compliance team visits were legitimate environmental assessments. He characterized me as a paranoid recluse who'd overreacted to routine community oversight. Judge Morrison listened without expression. The jury didn't seem convinced. The verdict came on the 4th day. Guilty on all counts. Derek Vance received 90 days in county jail and 2 years of supervised probation. Ray Munson and Eddie Grimes each got 60 days and 18 months of probation. The 2 cooperating defendants received 30 days and 1 year probation. Craig Hollister, as the organizer and commander, received 6 months in county jail with 3 months suspended, 3 years supervised probation, and 500 hours of community service. Judge Morrison addressed him directly. Mr. Hollister, you exploited a position of community trust to conduct criminal activity while hiding behind the appearance of legitimate governance. This sentence reflects both the seriousness of your conduct and the need to demonstrate that wealth does not place anyone above the law. The civil case followed the same week, consolidated before Judge Morrison by agreement of both parties to reduce court costs and avoid duplicative proceedings. Rachel presented our claims efficiently, introducing the email blast that accused me of threatening employees with a shotgun, the false environmental complaints Craig had filed with the county, and the financial records showing $37,000 paid to Derek's company from HOA operating funds without board authorization. She didn't rehash the criminal evidence. She built on it, showing how each criminal act connected to quantifiable damages. Lost income from the weeks I'd spent preparing for legal battle instead of working my ranch. Security system costs. Attorney fees. Emotional distress was documented by my physician. The defamation had turned lifelong friends against my wife. Craig's civil attorney argued the HOA had acted within its perceived authority. Judge Morrison ruled in our favor on every claim. Craig Hollister and Hollister Development, LLC, were ordered to pay $75,000 in compensatory damages. Pinewood Estates, HOA, was ordered to pay an additional $25,000 for enabling Craig's conduct through negligent oversight. A permanent restraining order prohibited Craig and Derek from coming within 500 feet of me, Maggie, or our property. When Judge Morrison finished reading the judgment, Craig sat motionless in his chair. His attorney whispered something to him, but Craig didn't respond. He stared at the table in front of him like a man watching his empire turn to ash. No outburst, no threats about connections, just silence. It was more satisfying than any words could have been. I stood outside the courthouse afterward with Maggie and Rachel, squinting in the afternoon sun. A reporter from the local television station approached with a cameraman. "Mr. Dawson, do you have anything to say about the verdict?" I thought about the families who'd lost their homes before me, the people who'd been too afraid to fight back. The 3 years Craig had spent believing his money made him untouchable. "Document everything," I said. "Know your rights, and don't let anyone convince you that their connections make them above the law. The system works when people are willing to use it." The reporter thanked me and moved away. Rachel was already on her phone, talking to someone about the HOA's insurance carrier and the collection process. Maggie squeezed my hand. I looked back at the courthouse steps, where Craig Hollister was being led to a transport van. He kept his eyes on the ground as the deputy guided him inside. The door closed. The van pulled away. And just like that, the man who'd tried to take everything I had became someone else's problem. 6 months after the verdict, I stood at my east gate watching the sun rise over land that felt different now, not because anything had changed about the pastures or the cattle or the fence lines I'd walked for 30 years, because the weight was gone. The threat that had pressed down on every morning for nearly a year had lifted, and what remained was simply peace. Craig Hollister served his 3 months in county jail, then sold his house and left the state without a word to anyone. Derek Vance, Ray Munson, Eddie Grimes, and the others scattered within weeks of completing their sentences, transferring probation supervision to distant counties, taking jobs in places where nobody knew their faces. The men who'd walked onto my property believing they owned it had vanished like they'd never existed at all. Hollister Development LLC collapsed the month after the criminal convictions became public record. No bank would finance a project led by a convicted felon with pending civil judgments, and when the County Planning Commission revoked approval for Phase 2 expansion, there was nothing left to save. Craig's name disappeared from the corporate filings, replaced by a former partner who wanted no part of my 45 acres or anyone else's. The changes inside Pinewood Estates came faster than I'd expected. Michelle Turner was elected HOA president 3 weeks after the trial, and her first act was commissioning an independent audit that uncovered $52,000 in misappropriated funds. She pushed through a bylaw amendment requiring a 2/3 membership vote for any future changes to jurisdiction or authority, then personally mailed every homeowner a summary of Craig's financial misconduct. The association filed suit to recover what he'd stolen. I didn't follow the case closely. I had my own life to get back to. A few people from the community reached out in the months that followed. Susan Whitmore, the woman who'd asked Maggie if I was dangerous, appeared at our door one Sunday with a homemade pie and an apology. Maggie forgave her more easily than I did, but I shook her hand and thanked her for coming. A retired teacher named Harold Vance, no relation to Derek, stopped me outside the feed store to say he'd watched the trial coverage and wanted me to know that not everyone in Pinewood had believed Craig's lies. Small gestures, enough to remind me that communities can heal when the people poisoning them are removed. Michelle Turner visited the ranch one afternoon to introduce herself properly. We walked along the fence line together while she explained the reforms she'd implemented, the transparency requirements, the financial controls, the explicit limits on board authority. "What Craig did to you could have happened to any of us," she said. "The difference is you had the will to fight back. Most people don't." I told her that was exactly why the fight had mattered, not just for my land, but for everyone who'd been too exhausted or too afraid to stand up for theirs. Tom Beaumont came by on a Saturday morning in late autumn, not for business, but for coffee. We sat on my porch watching the cattle graze, talking about nothing in particular, enjoying the kind of silence that only exists between people who've been through hard things together. After a while, he set down his mug and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "That morning when they came back with Craig, you knew we were there. You knew we'd handle it. But when you walked out to meet them, weren't you tempted?" Even a little, I knew what he was asking. The shotgun in my gun safe, the legal justifications I could have claimed, the faster, older way of settling disputes between men. "Every time," I admitted. "Every single time they set foot on my property. Part of me wanted to handle it myself." Tom nodded like he'd expected that answer. "So why didn't you?" I thought about it for a moment, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to say it right. Because winning a fight isn't the same as solving a problem. If I'd met them with a gun, maybe they'd have backed off. Maybe someone would have gotten hurt. Either way, Craig would still be running his operation, just targeting someone else. The only way to actually stop him was to let the system do what it's designed to do. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he raised his coffee mug. To do it the hard way. I touched my mug to his. To do it the right way. Maggie joined us after a while, bringing fresh biscuits and a warmth that filled the porch more than the morning sun. When Tom finally left, she and I walked down to the east gate together, the way we'd walked it 100 times during the months of uncertainty. The no trespassing sign hung where it always had, weathered but clear. It used to feel like a desperate warning. Now it felt like a simple fact. A boundary is tested and held. "What happens now?" Maggie asked. I looked at the land stretching out before us, the pastures my grandfather had cleared, the barn my father had maintained, the fences I'd rebuilt more times than I could count. For the first time in a year. I wasn't thinking about threats or lawyers or evidence. I was just thinking about the work that needed doing, the cattle that needed feeding, the life we'd built and almost lost, and somehow managed to keep. "Now we get back to living," I said. She slipped her arm through mine, and we stood there watching the morning unfold. The gate was open behind us. There was nothing to fear anymore. The land was safe, protected not by threats or violence, but by the law that exists to serve anyone willing to use it. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered.